This is my true story. My son thought I would die at the dinner table. He thought the poison in my soup would finish me fast, and the insurance money would be his by morning. He even whispered to his wife, thinking I couldn't hear, "Once he's gone, it's ours." But what he didn't know was that I was recording every word. I swallowed, I smiled, and I stayed silent. I let him think he had won. But the next day, in front of the whole family, I pressed play, and his face turned blue. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe so more people hear my story. I was not a rich man when I was young. I worked in factories, in fields, in places where the air was thick with dust, and the nights were long with silence. Every coin I earned, I saved. Every dollar that came in, I split between bills, food, and a small jar hidden in the cupboard. That jar was not for me. It was for him, my son. I dreamed that he would never know the hunger I knew, never know the cold floor I once slept on, never wear shoes with holes that let the rain in. I wanted him to stand taller than me, live better than me, and carry the family forward with respect. That was my mistake. I believed sacrifice would buy loyalty. When he was small, I carried him on my shoulders, even when my back ached from long shifts. When he was sick, I stayed awake at his bedside all night, checking his fever, feeding him water spoon by spoon. I told myself that no matter what, I would be the shield between him and the world. His first bicycle, his first computer, his first car, all of it came from my hands, from the sweat I left behind in every factory floor. I gave without hesitation. I gave without asking for thanks. I gave because he was my son. When he reached college age, I did what fathers are supposed to do. I took loans. I emptied savings. I sold land that had been in the family for generations. All so he could walk into classrooms with his head high, while I sat at home counting coins to pay for the next semester. He never asked me how I managed it. He never asked me if I had food on the table. He just accepted it, as if it was his birthright. And I let him, because I believed that one day he would remember, and one day he would return the kindness. Even when he slipped, I was there. His gambling debts, his drinking nights, the bad friends who drained his pockets. Every time he fell, I picked him up with money I didn't have, with energy I didn't own. I thought each rescue would pull him closer to me, that he would see how much I loved him. But each rescue only pushed him further. He stopped seeing sacrifice as love. He started seeing it as weakness. By the time he was grown, my body was old and tired. My back bent. My hands shook. My eyes blurred when I read the newspaper. And yet, I still gave. I gave him the house to live in. I gave him the car to drive. I gave him my name so he could stand in society with pride. He had everything because I bled for it. But instead of gratitude, he grew greedy. Instead of respect, he grew impatient. He began to talk about money more often. Not money he could earn, money he thought was his by right. He looked at my insurance policy with eyes that didn't belong to a son. He asked about the details, about the amounts, about when it would be paid out. He never asked if I was comfortable. He never asked if I needed anything. He only asked about numbers. That was when the air shifted. That was when I began to see the rot. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining it, that he was still my boy, that maybe he was only careless with his words. But then his tone grew sharper, his eyes colder. He no longer called me father. He called me old man. He no longer laughed with me. He laughed at me. Every time I moved slow, every time I coughed, every time I hesitated, he looked at me not with concern, but with irritation. Like I was in his way. Like I was a burden standing between him and the life he wanted. The sacrifice I made, the decades of labor, the meals I skipped so he could eat. They had turned rotten in his mind. He did not see them as love. He saw them as weakness to exploit. And that was when I understood. My son was no longer waiting for me to die naturally. He was planning to push me faster toward the grave. My life insurance was not security for the family. It had become his prize money. My survival was not his concern. My death was his plan. That realization hit me harder than any illness ever could. A father lives to protect his children. But what happens when the child becomes the danger? I sat in my chair one night, staring at the insurance papers he had been snooping through. My hands trembled, not from age, but from anger. Everything I had built, everything I had given, had created not a son, but a predator. My sacrifice had rotted, and I was the fool who fed the rot. But he had made one mistake. He thought I was weak because I was old. He thought I was blind because my eyes blurred. He thought I was deaf because I stayed silent. He thought I was powerless because I moved slow. But he forgot the truth. I had survived harder nights than he had ever known. I had lived through hunger, through poverty, through betrayal before. I knew how to wait. I knew how to watch. And now I would turn all of that against him. It started small, a look, a word, a change in tone. My son no longer spoke to me like family. He spoke to me like a problem. He would sigh when I asked for a glass of water. He would roll his eyes when I asked about the bills. Sometimes he muttered under his breath, thinking I couldn't hear. But I did hear. Too much trouble. Always sick. Better off gone. Words sharp as knives dropped in the air like dust, meant to vanish. But they never vanished for me. They cut deeper than any wound. Then came the food. At first, he insisted on bringing me my meals. He said it kindly, like he was caring for me. "You should rest, Father. Don't bother with the stove. I'll cook for you." His smile was thin. His voice was calm. But I knew the difference between love and calculation. I had fed him since he was a boy. I knew when he was hiding something. The way he hovered when I ate. The way his eyes followed every spoon. The way he asked, "How does it taste?" It was not concern. It was hunger, but not the kind that comes from an empty stomach. It was hunger for my death. One night, I noticed it clearly. He set down a bowl of soup in front of me. Steam rose from it, but the smell was strange. Bitter, metallic. My tongue knew it before the spoon even touched my lips. I stirred it and saw the way he leaned closer, pretending not to watch but watching every move. I tasted one small sip. The bitterness burned my throat. My stomach clenched. I pushed the bowl away and said nothing. His face flickered, surprise, then annoyance. He quickly hid it with a smile and said, "Not hungry? That's fine. You should rest." That was the night my suspicion turned to certainty. My son was not just impatient. He was not just cruel with words. He was trying to poison me. After that, I became careful. I stopped eating meals he prepared unless I had to. I kept small bites, small sips, just enough to keep his suspicions low. He could not know that I knew. If he sensed doubt, he would change tactics. He might grow bolder, faster, more violent. I had to let him believe his plan was working. That was the only way to catch him. I began to notice the pattern. Every time I ate his food, he lingered close by, too close. He stared at me longer than normal. When I coughed, his lips curved into the smallest smile before he quickly covered it. When I staggered from weakness, he didn't reach to help. He simply watched. That was when the truth hit me hardest. My suffering was his entertainment. I remembered the old days when he was small, how I would stand over his bed when he was sick, praying he would wake, how I fed him broth when he couldn't lift a spoon, how I carried him on my back to the doctor when he was too weak to walk, and now, in return, he gave me poison. But I stayed quiet, because silence was my weapon now. I pretended not to notice. I let him think I was still blind, still trusting, still weak. I coughed and trembled, letting him believe he was closer to his payday. Every cruel glance, every muttered word, every bitter spoonful. I stored it in my memory. Each one was another nail in his coffin. The whispers grew bolder. I caught him speaking to his wife when he thought I was asleep. "The policy will cover it. Once he's gone, we'll start fresh. The money will fix everything." His wife didn't argue. She didn't say no, she only said, "Just make sure it looks natural." My heart clenched hearing it. They were partners in my murder. My own son and the woman he brought into the house. I lay in my bed that night staring at the ceiling. The fan spun slowly, shadows moving across the room. My chest ached, not from the poison but from betrayal. The boy I had raised, the man I had saved again and again, was planning to bury me for money. The woman I welcomed like a daughter was whispering for my death. It was enough to break a weaker man. But I was not weak. I was old, but I was not finished. Suspicion had turned into certainty. Certainty had turned into fury. But fury alone would not save me. I knew I could not fight him with fists. I knew I could not outshout him. I knew I could not trust the law without proof. He would lie, and people would believe him. Everyone always believes the younger man over the older. Number. I needed more than suspicion. I needed evidence. Hard, cold, undeniable evidence. Something that would destroy him in front of everyone. So I made my plan. The next time he brought me food, I would be ready. I would have a recorder hidden. I would let him speak his own betrayal into the machine. And when the time was right, I would not confront him in private. No, I would expose him in front of every face that had ever respected him. His friends, his family, his neighbors. They would hear his voice. They would know his greed. They would watch his downfall. The whisper of suspicion had become my weapon. Now, all I needed was patience. And patience was something I had mastered long before he was even born. The night it became clear, he set a bowl of soup in front of me. The steam rose, but the smell was wrong. It was bitter, sharp, like metal under heat. I lifted the spoon slow, and I saw his eyes. He was not watching me with love. He was watching me like a gambler watching dice. I tasted one sip. The liquid burned my throat, not like normal food, but like something foreign. My stomach clenched. My body told me what my mind already feared. He was poisoning me. I looked at him. His face gave him away. He leaned forward without meaning to, waiting for me to cough, to fall, to close my eyes. His lips almost curled into a smile. He thought he had won already. His wife sat close, pretending to read her phone, but her eyes flicked to me, then to him, and she gave him the smallest nod. They believed I was done. They believed I would not see the next morning. I did not push the bowl away. I did not throw it at him. I did not shout. I forced myself to stay calm. I put the spoon down and said nothing. I made my body sag like I was weak. I rubbed my chest like I was tired. I let them think the poison was working. That was my shield. If I showed strength, they would change their plan. If I showed fear, they would hide their tracks. I had to act like I was blind, deaf, and slow. Inside, my mind was sharp. I thought of every meal I had cooked for him when he was a child. Rice, soup, bread, milk. Food I had made with hands that ached but never complained. I thought of nights when I skipped eating so he could eat. I thought of the hours I stood in factory lines so he could have meat on his plate. And now the same hands I had fed were feeding me poison. The son I gave life to wanted to buy my death with insurance money. I leaned back in my chair and let him believe his plan was safe. But inside, I was already making mine. I knew suspicion was not enough. If I accused him with no proof, people would call me paranoid. If I told the police, they would say it was the weakness of an old man's mind. Words alone cannot fight greed. I needed evidence that no one could deny. That was when I thought of the small recorder I kept hidden. It was nothing special. A cheap device, old and scratched, but it worked. I had used it in the past to catch music from the radio. Now, it would be the weapon that saved my life. I hid it under my shirt pocket one night. My fingers shook when I pressed the button, but my face stayed calm. He brought me food like always, and his wife stood nearby. They thought I was tired, almost asleep, with no strength left to notice anything. I coughed and sagged into my chair to keep the act alive. But my mind was awake, sharper than it had been in years. The recorder was running, the red light buried in shadow. They began to talk while they thought I was drifting. His wife asked him softly, "Are you sure he won't notice?" He answered, "He's too weak. He doesn't even know what's happening. Once he's gone, the insurance money will fix everything." My chest tightened when I heard it. Every word felt like another knife, but I forced myself to sit still. I needed them to keep speaking. I needed the machine to catch every sound. He leaned closer to her and spoke with more confidence. It will look natural. He is old, sick, already weak. Nobody will question it. We'll cry, we'll make calls, the doctor will sign the paper. By the end of the week, the money is ours. She nodded, her voice low. Make sure it happens soon. We can't wait any longer. I sat frozen, but inside I burned. I thought about every sacrifice I had made for him. I thought about the nights I went hungry so he could eat. I thought about the times I stood in the rain waiting for him outside school, the times I pulled him out of his debts, the years I gave away just so he could have comfort. And this was what he gave me back, poison in my soup and whispers of my death. But my pain had turned into power, because the recorder caught it all. Every laugh, every whisper, every word about money, insurance, and my death. It was no longer my suspicion. It was his own voice, his own plan, his own confession. And once that sound was heard, not even he could deny it. I let the recorder run until the house went quiet again. Then, with careful hands, I switched it off and hid it under my pillow. My heart beat heavy in my chest, but I felt something new. Not weakness, not despair. Control. For the first time in months, I had control. He thought I was dying, but I was preparing his ruin. That night I did not sleep. I lay awake, listening to the clock tick, waiting for dawn. Every hour felt long, but my resolve grew stronger. Tomorrow, I would not be the victim. Tomorrow, I would set the stage. I decided I would not confront him alone. He would deny. He would twist. He would lie. No, I would make him fall in front of others. Family, friends, neighbors. They would all hear what I heard. They would see what kind of son he was. His downfall would not be private. It would be public. His mask would be ripped off in one moment. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, the recorder warm under my pillow, and I promised myself one thing. He thought he had buried me, but I would bury him instead. The hardest part was not the poison. The hardest part was pretending it worked. My son thought I was weak, thought I was dying, thought each sip was dragging me closer to the grave. I gave him that show. I let my head hang low at the table. I let my hands shake when I picked up the spoon. I coughed and rubbed my chest like the poison was winning. He smirked at me, proud, convinced his plan was perfect. I let him enjoy it because I knew the truth. The longer he believed, the harder he would fall. At night, when the house grew quiet, I practiced the act. I moved slow, as if my legs were failing. I groaned when I sat down, as if my bones had turned to dust. I closed my eyes often, like I could barely keep awake. He watched me from the corner of the room, whispering to his wife, and I could see the relief on his face. Relief that his plan was moving forward. Relief that soon he would not have to hide his greed. But while my body gave him weakness, my mind stayed sharp. Every cough was planned. Every sigh was deliberate. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him confident. I wanted him blind to the storm I was building under his nose. He thought I was fading away. In truth, I was gathering strength in silence. The recorder had already captured his whispers. I had his words, his promises, his confession. But I could not reveal it yet. Timing mattered. If I confronted him alone, he would grab the recorder, smash it, call me insane. Number. I needed an audience. I needed the family. I needed witnesses who would hear the truth in his own voice. And so I continued my performance, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every day he brought me food, and every day I played the same role. The sick old man too weak to resist, too blind to see. He leaned closer with each meal, waiting for me to stumble, waiting for me to collapse. But instead of death, I gave him silence. And silence was the trap. The silence broke him slowly. He thought it was victory, but in truth it was the rope tightening around his neck. I knew the time to act was close. The recorder held his whispers, but whispers in the dark are not enough. They must be heard by others, spoken into the open where excuses cannot survive. I decided to bring the family together. My excuse was simple. I told them I wanted everyone close for a small meal, one last gathering before the new year. They believed me because old men are expected to grow sentimental. They thought it was nothing more than a frail father clinging to his family. But in truth, it was the stage for my son's downfall. I sent the invitations quietly. I called each relative, each friend, each neighbor who knew us well. My voice was calm, soft, careful. I did not tell them the truth. I told them I wanted to share words of gratitude. I told them I wanted to see the family whole once more. None of them refused me. Old age carries weight when it asks for company. They agreed to come, and I knew their presence would be the crowd that witnessed the truth. In the days before, I played my role better than ever. I coughed harder. I let my shoulders droop lower. I dragged my feet on the floor like they could barely carry me. My son grew bold. He no longer hid his looks of impatience. He no longer pretended to care when I stumbled. He believed I was at the end. He believed the poison was doing its work. He believed the insurance money was only days away. On the morning of the gathering, I sat in my chair and held the recorder in my pocket. My thumb brushed over the button again and again. The small device was heavy now, not because of its weight, but because of what it carried. It carried his greed. It carried his plan. It carried his voice plotting my death. It was no longer just plastic and metal. It was a weapon sharper than any knife. As the hour came, the family arrived. They filled the house with noise, laughter, and footsteps. My son welcomed them proudly, thinking it was his moment. He shook hands, smiled wide, poured drinks, and spoke like a man in control. He imagined that soon he would stand as the head of the family, with money in his pocket, and the old man gone. I watched him and said nothing. My silence was not weakness. It was the calm before a storm. I waited until everyone was seated. The table was full. Plates clinked. Voices carried across the room. My son sat tall, confident, the master of ceremonies in his own mind. His wife sat beside him, her eyes sharp, her smile hollow. Around them sat cousins, uncles, neighbors, people who respected him once, people who trusted him, people who believed he was a son to be proud of. All of them were about to see the truth. I cleared my throat. The room quieted slowly. Forks paused. Eyes turned to me. They expected a blessing, a short speech, a memory. I looked around at their faces, one by one, and then at my son. His smile faltered just for a moment, sensing something in my eyes. He tried to recover, raising his glass, but my hand stopped him mid-motion. "I asked you all here," I said, my voice steady, "because I want you to hear something." The silence grew heavy. Some leaned forward, curious. My son's face stiffened, but he forced a laugh. "Father, not now. Let's eat first." But I did not stop. With slow hands, I pulled the recorder from my pocket and placed it on the table. It was small, unremarkable, almost invisible against the wood. But I saw the way his face drained of color the moment he recognized it. His eyes darted to his wife. Her hands tightened in her lap. I pressed the button. The red light blinked. The room filled with his own voice. "Once he's gone, the money is ours." Gasps rippled across the table. Heads turned, forks dropped. My son froze. His voice played again, clear, sharp, undeniable. "It will look natural. He is old. He will not fight. Nobody will question it." The whispers he thought belonged to the shadows now belonged to everyone. The crowd of family and neighbors listened in silence, their eyes wide, their mouths stiff with disgust. His wife's voice came next, faint but clear. "Make sure it happens soon. We cannot wait." The sound of their laughter followed, cold and cruel, echoing in the room where they now sat surrounded. I did not look away from him. I kept my eyes on his face as he realized his world was collapsing. He stammered, trying to speak over the recording. He reached for the device, but his hand froze halfway when he saw the eyes of the family on him. He muttered excuses, lies, nonsense, but none of it mattered. The recorder kept playing, each word another nail in his coffin. The gathering was no longer a meal. It was a trial. He was no longer a son. He was an exposed traitor, stripped of respect, stripped of his mask, standing blue-faced in front of the very people he had hoped to fool. The button clicked under my thumb, and the small machine became a hammer. His voice spilled into the room, flat and sharp, louder than the chatter that had filled the table seconds before. "Once he's gone, the money is ours." It came again, as if the walls themselves were speaking. Faces turned, mouths opened, hands froze mid-air. My son's smile broke apart like glass. His lips moved, but no sound came. His wife's hand dropped from her lap to the floor. No one looked at their plates anymore. All eyes were on the two who had planned my death. I sat still and let the tape roll. It played the next line. "It will look natural. He is old. He will not fight. Nobody will question it." Then her voice, "Make sure it happens soon. We cannot wait." Gasps followed. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else cursed under their breath. A fork clattered to the tile. The laughter and warmth that had filled the room minutes earlier was gone. Only cold silence and the sound of their greed filled the space now. My son tried to reach for the recorder but stopped halfway when he saw how many eyes were on him. He stammered, "It's fake. He's lying. He edited it." But his own laugh came out of the speaker again, the one he had let slip when he thought I was dying. His own tone, his own words, his own plan. There was no editing. There was no trick. Everyone could hear it. Everyone could hear the low hunger in his voice as he spoke about money over my body. I leaned back and kept my hands on the table. I didn't say a word. The machine did all the talking. That was the beauty of it. For months I had been silent, swallowing bitter food, pretending weakness. Now, silence was my weapon, and his own voice was the blade. People started to move. A cousin stood up, pointing at him. "You plan to kill your own father?" he shouted. An aunt covered her mouth with her hand. A neighbor shook his head slowly and muttered, "Shame." My son's face turned from pale to red to a strange gray-blue, the color of panic and guilt. He tried to stand, but his knees bent, and he sat down hard. He tried to speak, but the words came out broken. "It was a joke. We were joking. We never meant—" The tape cut him off with another line, another whisper about the insurance policy, the bank accounts, the new life they would build when I was gone. His wife pushed her chair back and stared at him like she didn't know him. Her voice cracked. "You said it would be easy," she hissed under her breath. She didn't even try to deny it. She only tried to move away from him. The people at the table saw everything, the plan, the lies, the greed. It was all there in the air, heavy and undeniable. He put his face in his hands and mumbled, "Father, please, stop this." But there was nothing to stop. The tape rolled on. The room had turned into a courtroom without walls. No judge, no jury, but every witness needed. He had been so sure that nobody would question it. Now everybody questioned him. The power had shifted. He was no longer the son in control. He was the accused, and the whole family was the judge. I let the recorder play until the end of the file, until the last cruel laugh faded out. Then I pressed the button again, and silence returned. It was not the same silence as before. This was heavy, final silence, the kind that closes a door. I looked at him and saw his shoulders shaking. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel joy. I felt cold clarity. This was what he had earned. Someone at the table pulled out a phone and called the police. Another person poured me a glass of water with hands that trembled. No one spoke to him. No one defended him. No one touched his shoulder. He sat alone in a crowd of people who had once thought of him as family. He tried again, his voice small. "It's not true, Father. You misunderstood. Please." But his words floated up and fell like dead leaves. They had no weight. Only the recording had weight now. I stayed still and watched. He had thought he was a wolf in my house. He had thought I was a dying sheep. But now he sat exposed, trembling, the color drained from his face, a thief caught with his hands out. He had wanted money. He had wanted freedom. Now he would have neither. The playback had given him a new name, murderer, and everyone in that room would remember it. The moment the recorder stopped, the room broke apart. Silence held for a second, then voices rose like waves. My son sat frozen, his hands pressed against his face, his body shaking. He tried to speak, but the words did not come out right. It was nothing. It was a joke. You don't understand. His voice cracked and stumbled. No one believed him. Nobody laughed. Nobody nodded. The same relatives who once defended him looked at him like a stranger. Neighbors who once praised him now stared with disgust. He had been proud when he walked into that room. Now he was a rat cornered in his own house. His wife pulled her chair away from him. She whispered harsh words under her breath. She did not cry for me. She cried for herself. She had been part of the plan, and now she wanted distance. She thought moving her chair would erase her voice from the tape. But everyone had heard her. Everyone knew she had joined him. The shame on her face was real, but it was not guilt. It was fear. Fear of being dragged down with him. The relatives began to shout. One cousin slammed his hand on the table and demanded, "How could you do this?" An uncle stood, red with rage, calling him an animal. A neighbor shook his head slowly and muttered, "A son like this is no son at all." Each word cut deeper than any knife. My son shrank in his seat, his face twisted, his skin drained of color. He looked around for support, for someone to stand with him, but every eye was hard, every mouth tight. I sat still. I said nothing. My silence was louder than their shouts. My silence told him that I did not need to raise my voice anymore. The tape had spoken. The witnesses had seen. His collapse had already begun. Then came the sound of sirens in the distance. Someone had called the police the moment the recording started. My son's head jerked up. He looked toward the door, his eyes wide, his chest rising fast. He knew what was coming. He pushed his chair back as if to run, but two cousins stepped forward and blocked his way. "Sit down," one said. His voice was low and firm. My son sat. His legs were shaking. The door burst open and the officers entered. Their uniforms filled the room with a new kind of silence. They looked at me first. They saw the recorder on the table. They asked simple questions, and I gave simple answers. "He poisoned me." I recorded him. "Play it." I pressed the button again. The voices of my son and his wife filled the air a second time. The officers did not look at me. They looked at him. Their faces did not change, but their hands moved toward their belts. My son panicked. He jumped to his feet, waving his arms, shouting, "It's fake! He made it up. He hates me. He wants to ruin me." But the tape kept speaking, clear and cold. His own words trapped him. His own voice betrayed him. He lunged at the recorder, but one officer stepped forward and grabbed his arm. My son struggled, but the officer twisted his wrist and snapped the cuffs on with a click that echoed in the room. The sound was final. It was the sound of his freedom ending. His face turned red, then pale, then almost blue. His mouth hung open as if he could not breathe. He begged, "Please, Father, stop them. Tell them it's not true." He looked at me with wide eyes, desperate, but I only stared back. He had wanted me silent in death. Now he faced my silence in life, and it crushed him more than any word could have. The police dragged him toward the door. His wife screamed his name, but no one moved to help her. She tried to stand, but her legs failed her, and she sank back down. The crowd watched without pity. Neighbors crossed their arms. Relatives shook their heads. No one spoke in his defense. No one stood between him and the law. He was alone. As he was pulled out of the house, voices followed him. Shame. Monster. Murderer. The same people who once called him friend now cursed his name. He twisted in the officer's grip, his face wet with sweat, his words broken. He was not the proud man he pretended to be. He was a desperate animal caught in his own trap. When the door closed behind him, the room stayed heavy with silence. People looked at me, their eyes soft now, their voices careful. Some put their hands on my shoulder. Some poured me water. Some said, "You are strong." But I did not feel strong. I felt tired. I felt empty. I had exposed him. I had survived him. And yet inside, I felt the hollow truth. My own son had tried to kill me, and I had been the one to bury him instead. The collapse was complete. He had lost his family, his neighbors, his freedom, his future. All that remained was shame, and shame would follow him into every cell, every courtroom, every dark night. The police did not need long. The evidence was in their hands, and it was not a story, not a guess, not a rumor. It was his own voice, his own words, his own laughter. They took the recorder, copied the file, and asked the people in the room if they had heard it. Every single person said yes. Cousins, uncles, neighbors, even his own wife. They all admitted they had heard him plotting to end my life. The officers wrote it down in their books. They did not look at me with doubt. They looked at him with certainty. Their eyes said what their mouths did not. This is finished. At the station, they played the tape again. He sat there, pale, sweating, shaking, but still trying to fight with words. "It's edited," he said. "He's framing me. He hates me because I didn't visit him. This is revenge." The officers did not move. They just let the recorder keep talking. And when his wife's voice came through, whispering her part of the plan, he turned on her. "It was her idea," he shouted. "She told me to do it." She stared at him with wide eyes, betrayed, but she did not deny her voice either. The walls of lies he tried to build crumbled faster than he could speak. The prosecutors were called. They listened. They did not need to search for motive. The motive was clear: insurance money, property, inheritance. They did not need to guess about intent. His own words gave them intent. They did not need to guess if it was serious. The bitterness in my soup, the sickness in my throat, the way he watched me like a vulture. Those details matched the tape. They wrote it all down. They built their case brick by brick, but the tape was the foundation. Without it, I would have been an old man with only suspicions. With it, I was a victim with undeniable proof. When the trial came, the courtroom was full. Reporters whispered, strangers stared, family filled the benches. He was brought in wearing cuffs, his face drained of all pride. He would not look at me. He kept his eyes on the floor. The judge asked the charges, and the prosecutor spoke of attempted murder, of insurance fraud, of betrayal. Then they played the recording one more time. My son's voice filled the courtroom, the same way it had filled my kitchen, the same way it had filled the family table. The same words, cold and hungry. "Once he's gone, the money is ours." The sound echoed against the walls. The jury's faces hardened. Some looked at him with disgust. Some shook their heads. He tried to speak in his defense. His lawyer told him to stay silent, but he could not. He cried, shouted, begged. He said I was framing him. He said the machine was broken. He said we were jealous of him. But every time he opened his mouth, the tape crushed his words. His wife sat a few rows back, silent, her eyes wet, her body stiff. She would not save him. She could not save herself either. She was a part of the whispers, and she knew it. The trial did not last long. Days turned into weeks, but the outcome was clear from the first playback. The jury found him guilty. The judge called him a danger, a man who had betrayed blood, a man who would kill for money. The sentence came down heavy, years behind bars, no money, no house, no freedom. The insurance he had waited for became dust in his hands. I sat in the back and listened. I did not smile. I did not weep. I only sat still, my hands folded, my eyes sharp. People looked at me with pity, but I did not need pity. I had already won. Not by strength, not by shouting, but by patience and silence. He thought he had buried me with poison. I buried him with his own voice. When the guards led him away, he finally looked at me. His eyes were red, swollen, broken. He mouthed the word "father" like it could undo what he had done. But it was too late. The law had him now. The family had seen him. The neighbors had seen him. His reputation was ashes. His pride was gone. His freedom was gone. His future was gone. The justice was complete. Not with fists. Not with revenge in secret. But with truth laid bare. He had wanted money from my death. Instead, he lost everything in his life. When it was over, I did not feel like a winner. I felt like a man who had survived a storm built inside his own house. My son sat behind bars. His wife faced her own charges. The insurance company closed the file. The house was mine again. The bank accounts were under my name only. But none of these things felt like victory. They felt like the cold end of something that had begun long ago. A father works, sacrifices, and hopes. He does not plan for the day when his own child will try to poison him. Yet that was the life I lived. People told me I was strong. They told me I was clever. They said, "You saved yourself." But I did not feel clever. I felt tired. I had spent decades building a son. I had spent months pretending to be weak to catch him. I had listened to his laughter while swallowing his poison. That was not strength. That was survival. After the trial, I left the courthouse and walked alone down the street. The air felt heavy but clean. Nobody followed me. Nobody asked for pictures or statements. I went back to a small apartment I had rented while the case was going on. It was quiet there. No poison in the kitchen, no whispers behind the walls, just my chair, my bed, my own breath. For the first time in years, I ate food that had no fear in it. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waiting for footsteps in the dark. I did not visit him in prison. I did not write. I did not answer his letters. I heard from relatives that he cried, that he begged for forgiveness, that he said he was sorry. But forgiveness is not a right. Forgiveness is earned. He had tried to take my life for money. He had betrayed everything I gave him. He had tried to make my death look natural. There is no apology that can erase that. I gave the house away to charity. I moved my savings into accounts he would never find. I cut all ties with people who had stood by him while he mocked me. I chose peace over revenge. I did not want to watch him rot. I wanted to live the rest of my life free from his shadow. So I vanished. I moved to a town where nobody knew my name. I bought a small house with my own cash and planted a small garden. I woke up early, made my own meals, and sat outside watching the sky. Sometimes at night, I thought of him as a child. I remembered carrying him on my shoulders, teaching him how to walk, how to speak, how to ride a bike. I remembered the joy on his face when I gave him his first toy. I remembered the way he used to hold my hand crossing the street. And then I remembered the bitterness in the soup, the whispers in the kitchen, the way his eyes watched me like a hawk waiting for me to fall. Those memories lived side by side, but I never let the second erase the first. It only reminded me that people choose who they become. He had chosen greed. He had chosen betrayal. I do not hate him. Hatred is heavy. I have carried enough weight. I let it go. I do not forgive him either. Forgiveness is a gift, and some people do not deserve gifts. I simply live. I eat. I walk. I breathe. I enjoy the quiet. I protect what is mine. My life belongs to me again. Neighbors in my new town know me only as an old man who reads the paper every morning. They do not know the story behind my eyes. They do not know about the recorder, the soup, the police, the courtroom. They just see a man sitting in the sun. That is enough. Sometimes people ask me for advice. They ask how to protect themselves from betrayal. I tell them this: listen quietly. Watch carefully. Protect your papers. Protect your proof. People may call you weak, but patience is stronger than noise. Silence is sharper than a blade. My son thought he was clever. He thought he had me cornered. He thought his plan was invisible. He thought I would die without a sound. Instead, I lived, and his plan was exposed. He thought his greed would give him a future. Instead, it took his future away. He thought I was weak. Instead, I outlived him. I do not know what will happen to him after prison. I do not follow his case. I do not read his letters. That life is over for me. I have my own life now. My own peace. My own quiet. Final thought. He tried to poison me for insurance money. He thought I would die without a sound. But I recorded him. I pressed play, and his face turned blue in front of everyone. He lost his freedom. I kept my life.